Hello and welcome back to Fathoming Fish Tarot. My name is Joshua and you're back for yet another Topical Tarot talk. So today I'd really like to talk about privacy and esoteric practice and how those two intersect. So when I talk about esoteric practice, I of course mean tarot, even if your tarot practice is not necessarily definitively esoteric, meaning if you're using tarot more for counseling or for meditation or for problem solving or something for psychological purposes, it's still under the umbrella of esoteric practice today for what I'm saying. But generally, esoteric practice is any sort of thing, tarot, astrology, rune casting, oracle cards, anything like that that's something that you might do for another person or even for yourself that has an esoteric or occult background to its practice. So that's what we mean about esoteric practice. So privacy and esoteric practice. Well, today, specifically in our era, we talk a lot about privacy. We have a lot of concerns about privacy. We're always very concerned about our information being used against us when it's sold by businesses on Facebook. We're concerned about our privacy and our bank information from online shopping. We're concerned about the privacy of our conversations and information shared and pictures shared when we use the cloud, when we use wireless communication. We're concerned about the privacy of our devices. We're concerned about the privacy of our consumer data and our web history and things like that. And it's something that, regardless of how involved you are in technology, you still have a kind of an understanding of it and you're somewhat concerned about it. And you'd be upset if you found out your information was being violated. This way, everyone tends to freak out when they are talking about something and then Facebook suggests it as an ad or something. And they're like, oh my God, I'm being listened to. That is kind of indicative of our current issues with privacy that we have in our culture. So with that in mind, with us being very sensitive to privacy, I often wonder why we have such little sensitivity about privacy when it comes to esoteric practice. Now that probably begs the question, do we? Well, I think we do. I think in general we have some issues with privacy with esoteric practice, particularly in how we as practitioners choose to justify overstepping boundaries with privacy. And what do I mean by that? So first of all, very, very basically, I can talk about like client confidentiality, meaning if you read for someone, you really shouldn't be telling anybody else about that reading. If you do, do it in a way that is not meant to be gossipy. Like, for example, if you're like in a tarot group and you're talking about a reading you gave and you want some professional insight, you can frame it in a way, because you're talking with people who have no idea who you read for, no interest in that, and you can frame it without using specifics to get some professional feedback without necessarily violating their privacy. That said, in general, you really shouldn't be talking with other friends and family about readings unless they've explicitly allowed you to do so. And if you do so, you have to do so very carefully. Meaning, like, if your spouse wants to know about a reading you gave for somebody, you can tell them, hey, that was kind of a rough reading, and, we went someplace uncomfortable, and I'm just, but you don't have to, and you really shouldn't share any details that would give them any understanding of what's going on. That said, I'm really not talking about that. I think in general, people kind of get that, or they should get that. What I'm specifically talking about in this case is privacy in regards to our practice. And what I mean by that is, how we choose to use our practice to get information for ourselves and other people, and whether or not that violates the privacy when we're doing it about other people. So, for example, when we do a tarot reading to get information about somebody, about what they're thinking or feeling or what their motivations are, it's not always a violation of privacy, but it can very easily become one. And so it's really important to have an understanding of what your views on privacy are and how you want your practice to respect that. And I think it's also important to ask ourselves some challenging questions, particularly, am I doing something that I'm only doing because I feel like I can do it, or I feel like I would like to do it? So, for example, I may not be able to read someone's private emails without having some sort of special access to their, to their email account. It's not something I can just generally do. It's not something I would know how to do generally, is how to get into someone's email without their password. But I can use tarot to try and get an idea of what they're thinking and feeling about a situation. Is this the same? It's kind of the question. Do I feel like it's the same? Personally, I generally do, yes. I feel like there's no difference between unlocking someone's phone and going through their messages, going through someone's emails, and then using tarot to gain insight into their private thoughts and feelings. There's also the fact that sometimes we know it maybe is unethical in every other case, but because we're personally invested in, or the other person is and they're paying us, or they really like us, or something like that, we're often willing to justify it because it's like, well, ordinarily this would be wrong, but I have insecurities and I have anxiety and I have fears about this relationship, so I'm going to go ahead and do the thing that is honestly kind of extreme to settle my uncertainties here, and I'm going to let that the ends justify the means there. And I think that's something that happens a lot in tarot, particularly when people are developing their practice and they're reading for friends and family. I see this a lot where people are doing this for friends and family, and they're kind of focusing on that kind of line of questioning. So here's kind of my thoughts on it. Bear in mind, with all these topical talks, it's always just my opinion. You can do tarot however you want, however your practice works for you, but I do encourage you to ask yourself some questions and see what your limits are and really understand what your moral compass is when it comes to how you do this, because it is really important, I think, to be able to say, I know why I did what I did, and to have some consistency ethically. So, if you're going to do it, make sure you know that it doesn't bother you to do it and that you don't agree with me completely. If what I'm saying bothers you or makes you uncomfortable a little bit, ask yourself, maybe I need to re-examine my relationship with tarot and my ideas about privacy and see if maybe I'm justifying overstepping some boundaries. So let's talk about some examples that I find to be problematic, which is things that I generally would be uncomfortable doing as a tarot reader for somebody else, or even for myself. So like example one would be using tarot to pry into people's thoughts and feelings when they're not part of our sphere of concern, such as the whole, hey, I want to know about what the ex-boyfriend is doing, or what he's feeling, or how his relationship with his new partner is. And it's kind of like, in what way does that, first of all, ask yourself, in what way is that my concern? Secondly, unless they have particularly put something forth for you to see, if they didn't post it on Facebook, they didn't message you about it, they didn't tell you about it in person, they may not want you to know about it, or you may not be one of the people that they feel you need to know, or that you need to know about it. So it's kind of like, if you are not already able to access that information, you probably don't need to access it. The fact that you can with tarot does not mean you should with tarot. Similarly, it's kind of like, well, you always, it's one of these cases where, how can I put this? Just because you're invested in it and it's tied into your validation and your sense of security or sense of self. Like, for example, if the ex left you and you want to be feeling reassured because you know their new relationship sucks, it really has nothing to do with you. It has to do with your ego about the relationship. And so just ask yourself first, is this one of these situations? Is this about my ego, my insecurities, or is this about me just being nosy? And I often hear people who want to come forward with the, well, but what if situation where they have like that one exception. And so, yeah, there are cases where that information is maybe important. For example, let me give you a good real world example. It's the difference between, for example, if you have an abusive ex, for example, you may want to know where he's working and where he lives at and the areas he's at a lot, so you can avoid those areas and avoid a potential conflict or avoid putting yourself in a dangerous situation. Especially if you're like in a circumstance where maybe the legal system hasn't done its best to protect you, and so a restraining order hasn't been granted, or you're waiting on a restraining order, having the insight about his schedule and his day-to-day life that is not normally your concern, it's still your concern because it's about your safety. Keyword being safety. This is a dire circumstance. It's entirely different to want to know about how your ex feels about you, because your ex's feelings are his private feelings. They don't really serve you. It's more about you and your attachment, if that makes sense. And so this is all about your issues that need to be worked out. Now, you can choose not to work them out, but as a tarot reader, I'm not going to be part of it, and I'm not going to accept money for it personally. You can find one who does, but I just really hope that tarot reader is also the sort of person who's asked themselves how comfortable they are with it. Personally, I'm not going to contribute to somebody ruminating over and chewing on an issue that's not really serving them and causing them to fixate on somebody who's not really a part of their life anymore. I'm certainly not going to do so at the expense of that person, because that person deserves some privacy and dignity too. Even if they're a total asshole, they still deserve it. So, if it's a case where there's dire urgency, there's relevance to your day-to-day safety and health, then yes, it's okay to ask those questions. And again, this is within my practice, within my opinion and my scope on my practice. So if you're like, well, you can't tell me it's not okay. No, I can't. But I can say what I believe is okay for me, and I'm sharing that. And I'm hoping you'll at least question your own practice a little bit and decide what's right for you. So when I say okay, I mean it's not okay to me to do that. And I think within my ethics, I would be very, very critical of something or someone that encouraged that. But it is okay. It's okay to find out what you need to know for safety and for health and security. But by security, I mean real security. I don't mean emotional security. I don't mean validation. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. It is about validation a lot of the time. Wanting to know what your ex thinks is trying to make sure that you are still important to the ex, or trying to give yourself permission to stop making the ex important. Either way, these are issues you should really be working out, and you don't need to overstep boundaries and dig into someone's business to kind of justify it any more than to me, it's like you may as well go through his trash to see if you're finding used condoms to see if he's sleeping with someone else. It's like, it's that level of extreme to me. It may not be for you, but at least, again, I encourage you, ask yourself, am I maybe doing something I wouldn't want done to myself? Secondly, another example, this isn't strictly tarot because this is why I'm using the term esoteric practice for this video. I'm talking more about using, like, this is a big one for me, a big hot button for me personally, because it's been done in an abusive way to me and to other people I know. And this is something that's really, really popular online. So I say this almost with a degree of caution, knowing that I could make some people angry, but I honestly just have to say it. When you are fishing for birth information from someone to birth chart them without their full transparency of what you're about to do with that information, you are violating that person's privacy. It's no different from obtaining any other personal information as far as I'm concerned. It's no different than trying to get a phone number without that person's consent, without trying to get access to medical history, anything like that. It is straight up manipulative, invasive questioning as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to hear it. But, just hear me out, okay? So here's my thought about this. So, if they are involved with the process, meaning that you have made it very clear that you are going to birth chart them, you are very clear they know what that means, or they can understand it to a degree to consent to it, and if they have access to the information you have access to and have an opportunity to offer input into it, then it's fine. So if you want to birth chart your boyfriend or your new crush and they're willing to share that, and they're willing to share it with full awareness of what you're doing and what you plan on doing, fine. That's great. It's actually a cool way to get to know each other. I have no problem with that. But when you're like, hey, babe, can I, when were you born? Can you ask your mom exactly when you were born? And if they ask and you're just kind of like, I'm just doing some like astrology stuff, you're being evasive. You need to be really honest and say, I'm doing your birth chart because I want to find out a little bit more about your personality. That would be honest. It's dishonest to be like, I'm just doing some astrology stuff. Don't worry about it. And then trying to find stuff out and track their chart and track their transits. No, you weren't given permission to do that. You manipulated information and you're doing it. And why are you doing it? You're doing it for your benefit. So I just want to say, for right out there, having the upper hand in a relationship, having a sense of advantage in terms of information you have about that person, when they don't have it about you, is a bad basis for a relationship. It is just crappy, guys. Not only is it a bad basis for a relationship, there's really not a lot of justification for it. Relationships shouldn't be about having a little bit more information. Forewarning, having previous trauma, and trying to avoid situations that are similar to previous trauma, that's also not appropriate. This is why we take our time and get to know people and determine whether or not we want to be partners with them before we decide to chart them without their consent most often. It's just, this is not only bad because it's invasive, it's not good for you really either. Yeah, you may have a little bit more information and now feel like you have, a bit of an advantage going into this relationship, knowing what to expect from this person. But if they don't have that about you, that's not really a fair case. And if it doesn't feel fair, if you felt like you needed that because it was already unfair, guess what? This wasn't a good relationship to go into, and you knew it. So, the other thing being, understand that when we're dealing with esoteric information from tarot, from astrology, from anything, when we're dealing with this, we need to understand that, first of all, we are not infallible. Our interpretation could be wrong and will be wrong from time to time. Additionally, if we don't have context for it, we can jump to some conclusions. I'll just say right now, for example, I have some placements in my chart. I'm not going to share them because this is my private chart. I don't really feel like, if I don't feel like sharing it, then that's my prerogative. But my point is, I have some placements that I've had people read my chart and be absolutely determined that this meant I was a philanderer and I was absolutely not going to be faithful. Well, no, I'm actually very faithful, and I'm saying that in full confidence. I'm saying I'm a very faithful partner. I have been with my partner, my husband, for, let me count now, 16 years, but we are both poly, meaning we have other partners. We have consensual other partners. We have a third we have a poly triad that we're part of. And that also is a case still. We have fidelity there. It's just to an outside perspective, and with other aspects, particularly asteroids and things like that aren't exactly going to be on your freebirthchart.com. There's more context there that suddenly transforms what looks like a red flag into a more nuanced situation. But someone who's just kind of a casual dabbler at astrology, who's just putting it into the free chart, would not come to that conclusion. And if I'm not there to offer context and talk about it, and they're looking for problems to have with me, I'm at a disadvantage in this relationship. And also, I'm privy to all kinds of criticisms and attacks that aren't justified based on someone else's inaccurate and incomplete read of my chart. So, it's crappy. Don't do it. That's my take on it. Yeah, again, you don't have to listen to me. You really don't. But I just think it's something you should have a degree of hesitation about before you do. What if, and I always put it this way, what if I just decided to cheek swab you so I could go get your DNA profile done and see what your ancestry was? You may not care if someone knows your ancestry personally, but if I did it in a way that I was like, hey, can you suck on this for me real quick, and then go and do it, or even if I said, I'm just wanting to no, there's just not a good justification for it. You don't need someone's genetic profile to try and comb over it to see what their heritage is. And you don't need to do that for their birth chart. It's their birth chart. It shouldn't be an asset for you. It's an asset for them. If they give it to you and they ask for help with it, or they ask to share that information with you, and there's a good faith there, then that's fine. But if there's not, oh my God, it just drives me nuts. So the last one that I want to talk about is what is he or she thinking about? Well, okay, that's a complex one. First of all, I'm going to just point out, if you've ever read a comic book or a science fiction thing or anything with telepathy, you know right from the beginning that there's always this whole underpinning of ethics to the whole conversation about accessing someone else's thoughts. Marvel Comics in particular does an amazing job of really breaking down what the ethical implications of telepathy are and all the various ways that even the most well-meaning or incidental uses of telepathy can be invasive and hurtful and damaging to other people. And so I think we have a lot of examples in pop culture about that. And I think we should pay a little bit more attention to them because, for the most part, these are fantastic situations that don't apply to most people. But they do have a real world comparison to when we talk about how we access information about other people. And because we're talking about an esoteric practice, it's actually a little bit more applicable to things like this. So, first of all, we have to understand tarot is not telepathy necessarily. It's not going to give us clear, accurate thoughts. And tarot is very, very contextual and very, very based on how you ask it. So there's a good chance that if you ask how someone's thought, what their thoughts are, you're getting their thoughts in the moment. You're not getting their thoughts over a timeline unless you've carefully decided to structure the question that way. So from the very beginning, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail with this line of questioning because you're asking something that's going to give you something probably more literal than what you expected. Secondly, you have to understand that thoughts are very fleeting. Thoughts are the domain of swords and air, and because of that, they're very tempestuous and change frequently, and they're very prone to suddenly stirring up and reacting to emotions and things like that and things going on. It's air, it's thought, it moves constantly, it's constantly being influenced by other things. And so when you are checking the thoughts of a person, you are getting something that's very fleeting. It's not going to be usually, unless you framed the question in a really smart way and you really broke it down to try and get like a timeline or a consistent look at their thoughts, chances are you're not getting information that's going to be super accurate to begin with. Finally, I just want to point out that, and this is my belief, but I believe our private thoughts are private and sacred to us. So if you would object to someone reading an email or a text message you sent to someone else without your consent, why would you not have a problem with accessing someone's thoughts without their consent? It doesn't matter if you're hung up on that person, if you have a complicated history with that person. Your lack of solid communication with that person does not justify you going to that extreme, as far as I'm concerned. Again, always my opinion. You're free to say you're full of shit and you don't know what you're talking about, but that's just my take on it. Here's my thought ultimately about this is that, first of all, there's no way that you're not overstepping a boundary with it. You're always going to be accessing something private that belongs to someone else, and if it's not with their consent, and it usually never is, then it's going to be unethical. Similarly, what you're getting is probably not worth that much either because it's so fickle and so ephemeral. Thoughts change, and your line of questioning, unless really strategically worked out, is probably not going to yield results that are going to be very useful for you to begin with. So generally, I encourage tarot students that I have to just not get into this line of questioning, but I know it's very popular, and I know I'm asked it a lot, and I sometimes have people who refuse to let me rephrase it, and that's where usually I refuse. I'll just say one of two things. One, I'll say, no, I'm not doing this at all. Two, I'll say, we can do this, but understand that you're going to get whatever is in the moment, and you may not like it. And that may be your kind of backlash here, is that, I always think too, this is going to be a bit of a, maybe seeming out of context here. There's a scene in one of the Chronicles of Narnia, and the Voyage of the Dawn Treader in particular, that I've always found really pertinent when it comes to my practice. And people are it's gonna sound odd because it's such like a to most people they think of it as Christian allegory. That doesn't bother me, but for some people it may seem odd to relate it to tarot. But it's a moment where when they're on this one island, and it's been a minute, I'm pretty sure it's the I can't remember what they're called. It's weird little invisible creatures. Lucy has to go into the magician's mansion to find a spell to make them not invisible anymore. In looking through this book, she finds a spell to learn the true thoughts of her friends, and so she casts a spell to learn the thoughts of a friend of hers, and she ends up eavesdropping on a friend while the friend is talking to another girl from the school who doesn't much care for Lucy. And so as this other girl is talking and saying some nasty things, her friend agrees and she feels very angry. Later on, when Aslan chides her for doing this, her justification is, well, she said awful things about me. I thought she was my friend. To which Aslan says, she is your friend, but you're not understanding how uncomfortable she is in this moment. You're understanding that this is something she said in the moment, that she didn't do you justice, but she didn't do you justice because she's with somebody who's very intimidating, very strong-willed, and she's afraid to say something. And regardless of whether or not she did that, you wouldn't have known about it. She would have been, and you violated that privacy in doing so. And now this unpleasantness that's now been dropped in your lap, this unpleasant truth that you really can't come clean about with her without telling her that you were eavesdropping, is now your burden to bear. So that has always been a thought that I've had when it comes to this sort of thing. It's something that I've kept in mind, and it's something I've tried to be, not like a guide to my practice, but just like a parable that I keep in mind when I decide whether or not I really need to know what someone else is thinking, what someone else's secrets are. Someone else's secrets are not necessarily going to help me to grow and develop or make smart choices. It's sometimes just a curiosity and indulgence. And it's okay to indulge once in a while, but if we're indulging at someone else's expense, I think there's a word for that. Exploitation. Yeah, I don't know that I want to encourage people to use the consequence-free nature of esoteric practice to encourage exploitation. This isn't like a right-hand, left-hand path thing. That, again, your moral compass will determine what's right and wrong for you. But understand that it's not worry-free. There's not a complete lack of ethical consideration when it comes to this. You can always reframe or refuse an invasive question. You can try to discourage yourself from doing it, or you can just do it if you want to, and that's fine too. But understand what you're doing, just because there isn't an apparent consequence, does not mean it's not unethical. Does not mean that it may not be hurtful if someone found out about it later. Why do you think there's like this whole trend of the boyfriend getting mad at the tarot reader? Oftentimes because of shit like this. So it's kind of like this. I would say, ask yourself before you approach a certain tarot practice or to esoteric practice, if you had the ability to easily unlock phones, read emails, or browse web history or texts of another person with no real consequence to you, would you do it? You may say yes to some of these. I can't judge what you're going through or what your relationship with that person is. You may say yes. But I think for most people, you would say you probably wouldn't out of respect for that person. Similarly, I want you to ask yourself, if someone could do that to me, how would I feel about it? I think most of us would feel fairly violated, even if what they were seeing was completely innocent. I think that would bother people, most people, to know that someone was pouring through their private information, private communication, without your consent, from a distance. So, I think privacy is important not just because it helps us create and establish a trusting relationship with our customers, but I think by honoring privacy, even for people who aren't present at the table when we're performing a reading or a service, is important because honoring that cultivates respect for the other. It showcases that we as practitioners, as tarot readers, as astrologers, as whatever, have a respect for what other people are going through. We honor their journeys, we honor their stories, and that we are not here to interfere with them or try and change them. We accept that these are their decisions to make, and that extends to people who aren't part of it. We're going to help them tell their story, understand their story, but if it's someone else's story, we need to tell them it's someone else's story. And I think it's really important to help redefine the nature of esoteric practitioners as a business and as a service and as guides, whether that be for money or as part of anything else, really. A way to get rid of this con man, pickpocket, untrustworthy reputation that we have is to consistently make sure that our practice is not exploitative and is not something for other people to worry about. This isn't apologetics. I'm not saying we have to be a good tarot reader so that other tarot readers can thrive and get a chance. That's not really what I'm getting at. This isn't, like I said, not left-hand or right-hand path stuff, guys. This is about what would you want done to you in this situation? Are you okay with someone using some sort of non-scientific spiritual means to read your emails, to go through your mail, to go through your trash? Does that bother you? If it bothers you, then you need to ask yourself, am I doing this with my tarot practice? And if I am, why am I doing it? Do I want to change it? That's really up to you. But that's all for this particular topic. I know this was another one that may be a little less fun, but it was one that's been bothering me for a while. I've been meaning to make this video. I think this is actually the first video I think I wanted to make, and I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off because I thought it might be a little bit controversial. But I think it's important to talk about. So, and I think, no, we're not perfect either. We've all done it too. I'm not going to act like I've never done it. I've been reading for 16 years. I've definitely tried to figure out what somebody, a friend, a family member, a coworker was thinking because I was super, super, super uncertain about something and just wanted an answer. And some people will say, well, I'm here to give answers. Okay, that can be your practice. Just make sure your practice isn't exploiting someone else and isn't disrespecting someone else. And if it is, make sure that you're okay with it. And you can, you're not unaware that you've been doing it. It's kind of like, if you're okay doing it, then that's fine, but you may not be aware how much you've been doing it. Another one being too, well, this sounds very much like the model of like the very modern tarot practice, sort of the tarot is therapy, the tarot counselor, this sort of, no, I'm here because it's all spiritual with me. This is a spiritual service, not, I don't need to follow the model of other professional services because this is spiritual. Well, spiritually, let's be real. Is it really a great spiritual practice to be opportunistic and invasive of other people's dignity and privacy? I don't think so. I would think that it would be something that would actually be detrimental to our spiritual growth to encourage us to be predatory and exploitative of other people like that. So anyway, that's all. Hope this was an interesting and thought-provoking conversation for you guys. So that's pretty much it. If you have thoughts about it, please leave a civil comment in the comment section. I'd love to talk to you about it. Like and share this video if you found this engaging. I really would appreciate that. And you can always subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate any subscribers. And you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Fathoming Fish. So that's all, guys. I will see you next week with another Topical Tarot Talk. Bye.